Welcome to this explainer. I am so glad you're joining us today because honestly, we've got a completely fascinating textual mystery to dig into. Now, if you've spent any time at all looking into biblical history or ancient manuscript evidence, you already know that just a single word can literally change how millions of people understand their faith. It's like a giant puzzle. Today, we're looking directly at the textual and historical evidence surrounding the divine name in the New Testament. We're going to break down the original documents step by step and see what the data actually tells us.
So, to set the stage here, we're looking at a very specific modern translation claim. The New World Translation, which you might know is published by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, makes a rather unique textual choice. They actually insert the name Jehovah directly into the New Testament, or the Christian Greek scriptures. In this explainer, we're going to look totally impartially at the textual data and the historical records. We want to see exactly how this was done, what the standard rules of textual criticism say about it, and, most importantly, what the ancient evidence actually reveals to us.
Okay, let's dive into this. 237. That is exactly how many times the name Jehovah was inserted into the New Testament by the translators of the New World Translation. So we're not just talking about a handful of isolated occurrences here. No, it's a highly systematic translation choice applied 237 times across the text. But, as we know, in the world of textual criticism, any modern translation is really only as reliable as the ancient manuscript evidence that supports it. So we've got to ask the big question, what do the original documents actually say?
Zero. I know, that is a startling contrast to the 237 insertions we just talked about. Consider this. There are over 5,000 surviving ancient Greek manuscripts and fragments of the New Testament available to historians and scholars today. That's a massive amount of data. And yet, out of those 5,000-plus ancient documents, exactly zero contain the name Jehovah, or the Hebrew tetragrammaton, YHW. The original evidence simply doesn't have it. So naturally, you might be wondering, well, if the ancient Greek manuscripts don't contain the name even once, how in the world did the translators justify inserting it 237 times?
Well, the answer lies in what are known as J-texts. If you flip through the translation footnotes in the New World Translation, you're going to see references justifying these insertions with little labels like J7, J8, or J22. But here is the absolutely crucial point we need to understand. These are not ancient New Testament manuscripts, not at all. J-texts are actually relatively modern translations. We're talking 14th to 20th century here. They're texts where translators took the original Greek New Testament and translated it back into Hebrew, usually aiming for a Jewish audience.
This brilliantly illustrates the kind of textual overwrite happening here. See, the inspired first-century writers consistently used the Greek words kurios, which means Lord, and theos, which means God. And they used these words even when they were directly quoting Old Testament verses. In stark contrast to that, the modern J-texts insert Hebrew translations literally hundreds of years later. So from the perspective of standard textual criticism, taking relatively modern translations to alter and overwrite surviving ancient original Greek manuscripts is, well, it's considered a pretty significant methodological flaw.
Section 1. The First Century Reality and Jewish Reverence.
To really get a grasp on the original vocabulary, we have to understand first-century Jewish culture. It's all about context, right? By the first century, Jewish tradition strictly prohibited pronouncing the vocalized name YHWH anywhere outside the temple. And this wasn't out of disrespect, actually. It was quite the opposite. It was born out of intense reverence to ensure they never ever accidentally took God's name in vain. So when they were reading scriptures aloud in the synagogues, everyone just naturally substituted the name with words like Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord, or the Greek word Kyrios. And remember, Jesus and his apostles lived, taught, and operated within this exact cultural and linguistic context.
We actually see this cultural context perfectly reflected in how Jesus taught his followers to pray. Think about it. When Jesus gave his disciples the model prayer, which is famously known as the Lord's Prayer, just look at his exact words from Matthew 6:9. He says, "Our Father in the heavens, let your name be sanctified." Now notice what's notably missing there? He doesn't instruct them to use a specific Hebrew name at all. In fact, throughout the Gospels, Jesus consistently addresses God with the incredibly intimate term Father, or Abba.
But wait, didn't Jesus also say he made God's name known?
Well, yes, he did, but we have to look at what the concept of a name actually meant in first-century Semitic culture. You see, a person's name wasn't just about phonetics. It was a representation of their entire character, their reputation, their identity, and their authority. It's kind of like how today we might talk about protecting someone's good name. We aren't protecting the literal pronunciation of their name, we're protecting their reputation. So when Jesus made the name known, he wasn't introducing some new pronunciation of YHW to Jewish listeners who already knew the word. Instead, he was revealing God's intimate identity, character, and grace.
And this all builds into a massive paradigm shift in the early Christian congregation, because they embraced the Greek word kurios, or Lord. A very deliberate theological shift occurred. As we look at the data here, the New Testament writers would actually take Old Testament prophecies that originally referred to YHW, passages like Joel 2:32 or Isaiah 45:23, and they applied those exact verses directly to Jesus Christ in Romans 10 and Philippians 2. This was a deliberate linguistic choice, meant to demonstrate that Jesus shares the divine authority, status, and identity of the Father.
Section 2. The linguistic twist, origin of Jehovah. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it sets us up for a major historical revelation regarding where the word Jehovah actually comes from.
Let's trace the timeline of the divine name here. As we just covered, back in the 1st century, pronunciation was highly restricted. Then, a huge historical event happens. Post-70 CE, with the tragic destruction of Jerusalem, the exact ancient pronunciation of YHW is permanently lost to history. The exact way to say it literally just vanishes, gone. Then, we jump all the way forward to the 12th to 14th century, where the word Jehovah is officially created. That's right, created. It wasn't discovered, it was totally invented. Let's look at exactly how they did it.
It's essentially this wild grammatical splicing project done by medieval Catholic monks. Here's how it worked. First, they took the 4 Hebrew consonants of God's name, YHW. Next, since they had no idea what the original vowels were, they basically spliced in the vowel points from the Hebrew word Adonai, which, as we know, means Lord. Finally, combining the consonants of one word with the vowels of a completely different word resulted in the hybrid word Yehovah or Jehovah. It's literally a medieval linguistic invention. It really brings our textual detective story to a pretty fascinating climax, doesn't it?
Section 3. Beyond linguistic rules, the theological takeaway.
So the crucial takeaway from the mainstream scholarly consensus is really this. Honoring God's name is all about reflecting his character and respecting his absolute authority. It's not about repetitive vocalization of a specific word. For a lot of scholars, elevating a linguistically flawed medieval hybrid word above the actual inspired vocabulary chosen by the New Testament writers just kind of misses the point entirely. The original writers deliberately chose terms like kurios, theos, and father for some deeply theological reasons.
Jesus actually summarized his mission beautifully in John 17:26. He says in prayer, "I have made your name known to them." For modern Christians, following the textual and historical evidence really means understanding that God's name is most fully honored and revealed, not through some phonetic exercise of medieval vowels, but through the person, the authority, and the character of his Son. Jesus revealed the Father's true name, his true identity and grace, to the whole world.
And that leads us to a final, pretty provocative question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. Are we honoring a linguistically flawed medieval hybrid word, or the actual character and identity of God? Looking at it, the textual and historical data heavily points toward character over phonetics. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into the textual history of the New Testament. I really hope this evidence sparked your curiosity today and gave you some serious food for thought. Keep exploring, keep analyzing your sources, and I'll see you in the next explainer.